tea first.
Welcome to the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys. Thank you for joining us. You have joined us to learn more about the state of Hawaii, and we have a fellow here for you that is licensed to practice law in the state of Hawaii, and she is a fellow with the Academy. Carol, could you please introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, my name is Carol Lockwood. I live in Honolulu, Hawaii. I've been practicing law for way too many years, but I've been practicing in the field of assisted reproductive technology for about 12, 13 years now. And I love it. I had my own sons through donor insemination, which is what really inspired my interest in helping people develop families through the use of assisted reproductive technology.
We have quite a few fellows that are like that. I think it makes you better fellows for this area of law. So Carol, if people they're switching to the different states, they're taking a look, an agency maybe is trying to convince them to go to Hawaii. Is Hawaii a art-friendly state?
You know, I have to admit, I think Hawaii has a lot of things to offer when it comes to assisted reproductive technology. Obviously, if you have to wait for a birth or wait out the period between birth and establishment of parentage, there are worse places to do it than on the beautiful beaches and parks of Hawaii. But also, our biggest advantage is that Hawaii has a long-standing cultural tradition of having a broad definition of family. And so the concept of family, I think a lot of people became familiar with it through the movie, I think Moana, talking about Ohana, or maybe even Lilo and Stitch before that. But the concept of Ohana in Hawaii has long included many different types of families, concepts of informal adoption like hanai, and concepts of non-binary genders and things like that. So yes, Hawaii in general culturally is very accepting of different types of families, and our Hawaii courts have been very supportive of families that were created in involving the use of assisted reproductive technology or adoption or other than what are so-called traditional means of family creation. Although we know, of course, that even traditions have incorporated long more than the standard binary model for years.
So procedurally, what's the basics? What should they expect when they go to the state of Hawaii? We'll talk about surrogacy specifically, but obviously your work does not exclude egg donation, embryo donation, ovum donation.
Absolutely. Yeah. It includes all of that. But what everybody worries about the most, of course, is what's involved in the establishment of parentage. We have a slight disadvantage now in the sense that we do not yet have a pre-birth process here. We're working on it. We introduced legislation at the legislature this past year. It did not get out to committee, but we're going to keep working on it. In the meantime, our courts have been very open and even helpful in assisting with the application of our existing laws to the surrogacy process to allow us to establish parentage through post-birth processes. And so, among other things, for example, the courts have been very accommodating in allowing us, when a donor is involved, to combine the parentage process and the adoption process into a single hearing on the same day, which is a purely legal matter, technically, arguably should not be possible. But they do it because they recognize that it really doesn't make sense to establish parent A in January and parent B in June. So they've been very supportive and respectful and really encouraging of our families. The judges often have very moving things to say at the finalization hearing when they officially confirm what we all knew already, which is that the intended parents are in fact the parents of the child involved.
And is the birth certificate process efficient there?
It is. You know, it's a little bit slow, as it is in many places, especially with the COVID pandemic and everything that the departments of health have been through in so many states. There have been some delays, but when we've needed to expedite, we've been able to expedite. I've never had anybody held hostage in the state for an extended period of time waiting for a birth certificate. It's like any bureaucracy. You work with them as best you can, and they work with us as best they can.
And I know you said the state of Hawaii is it recognizes all types of families. How do they list same gender parents on the birth certificate?
We just have parent one, parent two. So, and they're very accommodating. Even though we have a presumed parentage rule, we tell the Department of Health in most cases we prefer not to include the gestational carrier's husband on the initial birth certificate, and they allow us to do that. So they work with us, but there's no, at the end of the parentage process, at the end of the post-birth process, there is nothing on the birth certificate that the child ultimately receives that indicates the child was born through assisted reproductive technology. It looks exactly the same as it would if the two parents had gone to the hospital and given birth themselves.
So for international intended parents, how long do you usually advise them they need to stay in the state of Hawaii after the birth of their child?
Um, I usually tell them, obviously, a minimum of a couple of weeks. There have been a couple of cases where we even got finalization done that quickly, although it does require a very accommodating judge. Otherwise, we tell them it's really as long as it takes us to get the passport issued. We can get an initial order from the court here that gives temporary legal custody to the intended parents, which is sufficient to get a U.S. passport issued and allows them to return home. When they have to stay longer, as often as not, it has to do with the laws in their home country as opposed to the laws here in Hawaii. So there are some countries where, for a variety of reasons, intended parents really prefer to have the home country citizenship in place before they return home with a child. And in those cases, they'll tend to be in Hawaii a little longer, but it's not because of our laws as much as their laws.
And does Hawaii itself have a U.S. passport office, or is it shipped out?
We have a federal building in downtown Honolulu, just off of Honolulu Harbor, that is very easily accessible. And actually, interestingly enough, within a very short walking distance of Iolani Palace and a bunch of other historic sites. So it's not unusual for unattended parents to pop the baby in a stroller and make an afternoon of it.
I think I would want to have a baby there too. That'd be great. It probably is a selling point, isn't it? But
especially in winter, it's not a tough duty by any stretch of the imagination.
So anything else big, major that people need to know just before they consider Hawaii, other than they need to call you and get more information?
Yeah, I really don't think so. I think, if you're leaving your home state for whatever reason, if you found a great gestational carrier in another state, I will say, I think another advantage we have, although I'm sure there are wonderful carriers all over the place, is once again, because Hawaii has this extended sense of ohana. For instance, my children have many aunties and uncles that are not genetically, biologically related to them, but who are as close to them as, and in some cases, maybe closer than their biological family. Is that is not at all unusual for a close lifetime relationship to develop between the gestational carrier and the intended parents and the child. And obviously, it's always at the intended parents' choice. But to the extent we have intended parents who want the child to have that connection with their tummy mommy or whatever they call the gestational carrier, it once again fits in very naturally to Hawaii's expanded definition of ohana. It's not hard to explain to anyone here that this ohana was not created in the so-called traditional sense, because that's very normal to all of us. So it's a very family-oriented and child-oriented state to start with. And so it's just a real natural fit for assisted reproductive technology.
Great. Well, for those of you that are listening and are as intrigued about Hawaii as I am, you will want to use Carol. You'll want to definitely get a hold of her. And an attorney is always necessary. You've got to have her in order to do this, but you can get her contact information by going back to the Academy's website. On the website, we have a map and you can choose the state of Hawaii and you can find her contact information there. The Academy's website is www.adoptionart.org. And we look forward to you calling Carol. And thank you for sharing your time with us today, Carol.
Really my pleasure. Thank you.